Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the new moon in the second decan of Libra. I am joined here today by my good friend Melissa LaFara. How you doing, Melissa?
Oh, I am doing just wonderful today on this fine Friday morning for me, afternoon for you.
Yeah, Venus Day, right? On Venus Day, we wear green. Um, but if you are stopping in today, tell us where you're coming from, where you're stopping in by in the chat box there. We're going to be doing a deep dive in all of the some Libra significations. We're going to talk about a really busy first couple weeks of October, including a few Kazimis with Mars and Mercury coming up, and a whole mess of planets turning direct. But if you have any questions for us, leave them in the chat box, and we'll try to do the best we can with it. So Mel, tell me a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to our audience. You have some really exciting things that you've been working on the past few years, right?
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, who am I? What do I do? Well, first off, I'm located in San Diego, California, as you can see by all the sun filtering into my office slash dining room right now. And what do I do? Well, I am a full-time astrologer and podcast host for the Energetic Principles podcast, which Spencer has joined me on a
Woohoo!
few times, and we've always get a lot of rave reviews when we come together with our SM7Bs and our our deep voices. I'm also a musician and just an enthusiast of life, basically. And yeah, fellow Cancer, just like Spencer, Capricorn full moon and Scorpio rising, in case you like to hear those details about people. But yeah, I've been practicing astrology for well over a Jupiter cycle now, and I'm always excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I love your show. You have the most amazing guests on there, and you're a wonderful host as well. So everybody check out energeticprinciples.com and subscribe to her podcast and check out her offerings. Any classes or offerings coming up for you, Melissa?
I don't have anything that you could sign up for today, but I am in the process of making my next course, which is actually going to be a play off the two courses I did before earlier in 2021 and in 2020, which is an astrology basics program that I've been shuffling along. And I'm working on the 301, which is actually going to be mundane forecasting, kind of like what we're doing here today, in relation to, planning your own life, if you are a practicing astrologer, being able to share that information with others, and even dabbling into things such as how that works with countries in the world and in different aspects of mundane. So that is in the works. So stay tuned for that. And if that is something that you are interested in learning more about, I do have a mailing list that you can sign up for on my website, which will inform you of the learning opportunities that come up. But also, I do now have a monthly newsletter called The Heavenly Wind, which comes out at the beginning of the month, just a couple days before the month turns over. October just went out. I'm going to send out another round of it here for the new subscribers that come in. But if that's something that you're interested in and want to keep up with the learning opportunities, I recommend you signing up for my newsletter slash mailing list.
Nice. So everybody go sign up for Mel's newsletter. Just to get some more of the housekeeping out of the way, I also have a Decans workshop that's coming up a week from Saturday. The Decans of Libra is going to be starting on October the 9th. I believe that's at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, I think is what we're still going under there. And I've been partnering up with my astrological friends and to help give folks 20% off. So for people that are fans slash subscribers for Melissa's work, you can use the code EP20 to get 20% off of the both decans of Libra or the bundle for fall, where you can sign up for all three of Libra, Scorpio, and Sagittarius. So that code again is EP20 if you want to get 20% off. All All right, so that's kind of the some of our shilling out of the way here.
Yes, getting all that. We were just talking about how the other night about how you want to just do the work, you want to create, you want to share, and then having to share and promote is something that, especially artists like Spencer and myself, musicians can have a hard time doing because
Yeah,
it's like those are two separate roles. So to be there is can be a little difficult at times. But I'm loving seeing the chat already, and we have a worldly chat. We have
yeah,
Remco from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. We have Gavin in Seattle, Angela in Paris. I love Paris. I wish I was there with you.
yeah. And Tarja is coming from Finland, so we have a
Oh,
that
Finland.
stops by. So
Yay.
it's
You're so
pretty cool.
worldly, Spencer. Where are you?
I love it. I love it. I love having all these international friends stopping by.
Me
They
too.
add such a unique perspective to the chat and to the questions, and I love seeing and hearing their perspectives as well. So I'm so happy that you're all joining us here today. All right. Oh, and Christopher is joining us from Denver, so not to be left out. Denver is represented as well. So thank you,
Yeah,
Christopher, for stopping by.
I love it.
So Mel, should we pull up this chart here and see what we've
Yeah.
got?
Let's pull it up.
All right. So we're looking at the chart of the new moon at 13 degrees of Libra on October the 6th, 7:05 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 4:05 a.m. if I'm not mistaken Pacific Time, correct? Are
Yes.
you three
Wait,
hours behind us
3 hours
here?
behind. So we're
Okay.
4:03 over here.
All right.
Or 4:05,
And
sorry.
yeah, like I said, this is really setting off some really active astrology for the beginning of the month of October. Anything that jumps out to you right away, Mel?
Well, we'd be remiss to say if we didn't just talk about right away seeing that Sun, Moon, Mars combo, and of course Mercury retrograde not far off in the distance there in Libra. Because it is not every day that the Sun and Mars come together. This is about a 2-year cycle. We haven't had Mars and the Sun meet since September of 2019. And it's introducing new energy in Libra just in general, because the last 3 Sun Mars conjunctions actually took place in Virgo. We had 3 in a row since 2015.
Mm.
So there's, I mean, obviously we're talking about the new moon in Libra today, but there's something within this kind of kickoff energy that new moons bring that is really seated in the Sun Mars conjunction. And it's not quite there yet because it happens the following day. So there's something to be said about it's not quite on the other side of it yet. It's almost on the last wrapping up of what that can mean. So to me, it feels like this really liminal space between all these planets coming together, but it's so potent in many ways too. So that's kind of the first thing that pops out to me. What about you, Spencer?
Yeah, it's definitely setting off a whole new cycle, right? I mean, you pointed out that the Mars cycles generally, and we're talking about the synodic cycle, so the connection of Mars and the Sun, where Mars is becoming reborn in the heart of the Sun, which traditional astrologers would call its Kazemi moment. So not only are we having the monthly lunar rebirth that happens every 30 days or so, but we're having a rebirth of the martial energy that happens every 2 years. And this is there's a lot going on here because Mercury is going to be reborn 2 days after the new
Yes.
moon, and we're in a decan, a 10-degree section of the zodiac that's associated with contracts, with oaths, with the things that the agreements that we are bound to. This is a double Saturn ruled decan. It's the card that we've got is pretty funky with the 3 of swords here,
I
right?
know.
I know you do the
I
tarot
am
here.
just like,
Yeah,
yeah, we have our 2 3 swords here. I'm like, look at those swords.
right.
All the rest of my cards dropped when
Um,
we said that.
right. So
They're like
this is like
drama. The moon is in Leo right now.
yeah, and it's The book T and the book of Thoth call that card sorrow. It's bringing us some challenging energy. But really, I think if we look at the progression with the decans of Libra, and this is something I'll talk about in depth in my workshop coming up, but we start off in the first decan having an awareness potentially of the inequalities that we're trying to balance out. And here in the second decan, we're trying to negotiate the terms of a new deal for fairness. And then by the third decan, we're going to get into the point where we have to make the adjustments that are necessary to keep the equilibrium afloat, so to speak. Like imagine like you meet somebody, recognize them as an opposite or something other than you, and then you have the wedding or the marriage in the second decan here. And then the third decan is like, once you get married, it's not like you just everything's happily ever after, despite what Hollywood will have you believe. There's lots of mini adjustments that you need to make to keep the relationship healthy. So I think this particular point is really about the negotiation phase and the new contracts that we're going to be, faced with, the new obligations. And both Mars and the Sun are not super comfortable
Yeah.
in their dignity. What do you think about that with the Sun and its fall and Mars in exile here?
Well, okay. So there's a couple things we can say about that, and we could play it off of the tarot and the decan that you were just talking about. And one of the things I want to bring up about it is that it's not just the Three of Swords. I mean, Three of Swords is the decan there, but when we look at the majors that are associated with it, because the Three of Swords is Saturn in Libra, which Saturn in Libra is actually an exalted position. So it's interesting to think about that. But it plays into justice,
Hmm.
which aka adjustment, which is a term you just used, and also the universe or the world. And so there's a worldly measure when we think about it, adjustment and justice, cause and effect. Some would like to say karma, and in relation to cycles that wrap up, cycles that begin, and another kind of like karmic adjustment that takes place. And when we talk about the sun being in its fall and Mars being in its detriment, when we talk about debilitated planets, what happens is there's just an inconsistency there that is
Hmm.
part of it. And when we think about binding contracts, it's not just the contracts that we enter into, it's the contracts we've been in as well. And part of the Three of Swords energy is that because it has this double Saturn effect, it connects with, in the Kabbalah, it connects with Binah, which is the point of understanding. And so what happens when this area is brought up is a lot of times we come to understanding certain things or knowing things that can't be unknown. And that can affect our bindings and our
Hmm.
agreements, where we know things and we're like, oh, we got to do this. We got to sign up for it. This is meant to be. I have to stick with this. I have to commit with it. Or now I know this thing and I can't unsee it. And I see this, then there could be the sorrow around like, this isn't going to work, or,
Hmm.
and then the Mars element of the cutting and the inconsistency that can come there too. But it's an idea of being faced with the inevitable. And sometimes when we're faced with the inevitable, well, usually we can't stay in the position that we're in. There's information that comes in and that then allows the storyline to shift. And to me, that is a debilitated planet. It's not upholding something. And it's the pivot nature of cardinal energy to begin with. And air, this is the possibilities that are out there, the negotiations and the talks that we have, the plan, the strategy that's in place. And so I have a feeling we're going to be faced with it could be a separation, it could be a bonding, but either way, the story shifts in
Hmm.
in a way that is not upholding what we're going into in this current moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I love the way that you framed all of that. I think that when we enter into an agreement, whether it's a partnership or a marriage or something like that, there's been different sages over various periods of time that talk about it being a death of sorts, the death of an individual to become the birth of a partnership. And we're going to have to give something up, I think, with this. I think that Libra, I love that you're pointing out the exaltation of Saturn. It is, of course, the domicile of Venus, but I really like blending the domicile ruler and the exaltation ruler together to get the flavor of that sign. And, I think that's one of the hidden secret meanings, esoteric meanings of Saturn in general, is trying to strive for balance and really through contraction, right? We come to that equilibrium. They said that Saturn was the planet of Nemesis, which is actually one of the spirits of Libra. The third decan is ruled by Nemesis in a Hellenistic fragment called the 36 Heirs of the Zodiac. And Nemesis was said to restore right proportion, but through maybe what feels like a punishment, right? So, and it's hard for me to be super confident that whatever agreements that we are presented with are going to be fun or or not require a lot of courage and adjustment because of Mars's presence in the heart of that. I think that, to me, this could also be the breakdown of certain agreements that we've had, like you were saying, but that may hopefully that will lead to something more just and something more equal moving forward. But we may have to go through that crumbling process first. Yeah, it's just some
Yeah.
really interesting
Well,
astrology.
it really is. And I mean, when we're looking at astrology, we can look at a point in time like we're doing right now, but it is beneficial to look back and possibly look ahead. And we think about the last new moon that we just went through with the new moon in Virgo that had so many trines and air signs. I believe Venus was trining Jupiter as well. And there was a lot taken on. So even if this story and this realization and what might be shifting for you is a longer story, it could be a shorter story that is in the last month or so, where maybe there was overcommitments or going headstrong into something that was like, oh, how am I going to make this all happen? Or do I have the energy? Do I have the time? This is another thing with Saturn, because, Saturn is in a loose trine to this lunation here. I mean, it's not exact, but Saturn is stationing direct a few days after this new moon, while Pluto is stationing on this new moon, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. But there's the idea too that comes with this decan and the Three of Swords and adjustment and the world, where it's the right timing, whether that's difficult or whether that, because sometimes difficult things are actually really positive. Like when you really want something in life, sometimes we have to sacrifice and work hard and show up and persist, and it's grueling, but the end result, the long-term, the Saturnian long-term plan that is behind it is worth it. But to me, there seems to be some element of it's the right time. And especially with the Sun and Mars conjuncting, because as you pointed out earlier, Spencer, Mars is this action energy, and the Sun illuminates our purpose to it. And when it seeds, we are off to the races with a new agenda. Now, of course, we might not know exactly what that is. It has a couple years to play itself out, but we're all seeding within us different motivations. And that is also adding to the idea of it being the right time. So you might want to look at in your life, like what feels like the right time for you right now? What have you been ruminating on? What is this Mercury retrograde square Pluto, as Spencer and I are talking here today? What is that bringing up for you? The trine to Jupiter, Mercury trining Jupiter as well. Like think about what this might be the right time for you to do. And despite how hard it might be.
Well, Mel, I wanted to point out something that Remco is bringing up in the chat. That the actual daimon or spirit of Libra II is Kairos, which is basically the opportune moment. There's a little story about Kairos in Greek mythology where he had a little lock of hair, on the front of his forehead, and you could only catch him from the front. Even Zeus himself, they would say, could not catch him from behind. So maybe there is that right Kairos moment. Austin in his book 36 Faces talks a little bit less about Kairos and more about, which was a deity associated with oaths and commitments and bindings. So there's a little bit of confusion with those two, but I think that you may be channeling something with the opportune moment type of thing here.
The opportune moment, because you don't want to miss it, right? Kelly
Right,
says this is
exactly.
potent right now. She must be feeling this in her life. But it's true. And I know one of the things that Spencer and I might talk about later, and I know he's like, I don't always get into mundane or like politics and things along those lines. But right now here in the
I'll
US,
get
we're
into it.
going,
I'll get into it.
he'll get into it. We're going
Today I
through
will.
this leadership crisis around our debt ceiling, and as
Yeah.
some of you might know, we are headed towards a Pluto return here in the US, and pardon the words, but shit is about to hit the fan. And this is leading into it, and we're under a crunch of time, right? And that's the idea of with right timing. We might know inside that it's the right time to do something, but there's also pressure from the world or the outside, or where we're on someone else's time
Mm,
table. And if we don't act and we think about justice and adjustment and the idea of Libra, cause and effect is a real thing. So sometimes the opportune moment isn't one that you make for yourself. It's pressure from the outside world or responsibilities that come in. And if you don't act in time, there is a cause and effect that is going to then unravel through
yeah.
that. And so that could be another point of it as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of the times when we have to renegotiate a contract, it's not because we want to. It's because, someone's brought up the fact that they don't think that the old contract is functional. So, it's always about, adjustments. And I think that sacrifice is really a part of it as well, because if you want to make something work, you do have to be able to see someone else's perspective and be able to have empathy and compassion for their viewpoint. And this is something I was actually talking about yesterday with another fellow astrologer. We were talking a little bit about Mars Cazimi. At the last conjunction in Virgo, the heliacal rising of Mars happened in Libra. So, Mars became visible really in a very similar place that it's having the Cazimi now. And we've seen these conflicts. I'm tending to lean towards the seeding of Mars as description of what some of our main conflicts may be moving forward. The way that I like to think about a chart recently is that the planet is going to give us some circumstances to respond to, and we have to make adjustments based on the way the planet is asking us to respond. So, like, for example, Mars being the planet in a night sect that is related to Tukey or fortune, the sect of the moon. And Mars traditionally associated with bad fortune and the sixth house. It joys in that sixth house of bad fortune. This may be some kind of misfortune that's coming to us that isn't necessarily something that is our fault. It's not necessarily something that we did anything to deserve, but we have to respond in a way that we can think of the more positive sides of Mars, using our will, using our courage, being able to take action, fighting for the thing that we've been separated from. Similarly, you can think about this with Saturn, where maybe Saturn is a readjustment of actions that we have taken since it's of the solar sect, and we have to learn to endure, or we have to learn to have patience in that area of our life. So it's interesting that the last one happened, the heliacal rise, which basically means the 15-degree separation of Mars from the sun, where it becomes visible. Is we've been going through the last 2 years some of the most polarized, like, ideological type of experiences that I've ever experienced in my life, where people, they can't even have a back and forth conversation. It's just what one person believes and what the other person believes, and there's really no meeting in the middle. And this is part of what we're seeing in America, like you were mentioning, with the negotiations with the debt ceiling, American politics has become so egregiously polarized that it just ceases to function altogether, or the threat of it dysfunctioning or not functioning is real. So I'm curious if this is another seed planted in that direction. One thing I wanted to point out, Mel, before we move on, is just the host of this full moon or new moon, excuse me, is Venus, but we are seeing a an aversion, which means that Venus is not able to witness this new moon. Now, I came across this really interesting concept with Martin Hermes. I don't know if you're familiar with Martin, but he talked about the exaltation lord potentially taking over some of the leadership for a particular planet if there's an aversion. So I'm curious if you resonate with this about maybe Saturn particularly kind of taking over some of the, I don't know, the clay that's being provided for these planets, because Venus isn't able to provide from her aversion, but also from her exile.
I could totally see that. I think that, of course, we have this exaltation ruler Saturn that is going to play some role within a Libra new moon. But I think Saturn has just been so strong in its position as it is, the fact that it's about to station, the fact that 2021 is really like embroiled in the Saturn Uranus square, that I think no matter how we slice it, we're always getting a piece of Saturn,
Mhm.
like Saturn.
Oh yeah, for
Saturn is
sure.
always giving us something here. So I could totally see why that would come into place, especially since it is within a whole sign trine to the new moon. It's in that like air airspace. I mean, yes.
Yeah.
And Venus, like you said, she is in a very interesting place. If we pull out her decan, we're in like the
Mhm.
Seven of Cups in what is known as debauch, which is actually Venus. It is Venus's decan there, Venus in Scorpio. But it
Mhm.
usually comes up when we have like all these options. We're entertaining. There's a illusory quality to it. We have to make a choice. Some might be good, some might be not so good. It's hard to see what those might be, but I the last couple of days I keep waking up with the Rush song in my head, Free Will.
Yeah.
And in the part where he goes, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. And I keep hearing, I keep hearing this in my
Right.
head. And it makes me think of that decan. And it also makes me think about the new moon and Mars being there too. And we talked about it being in detriment, and being in Venus's sign and not having, Mars is decisive action. Mars knows what it wants. It's that spear that thrusts forward and into battle. And when it's like pulled
Mhm.
back by Venus and other people's considerations, or being not knowing which choice to make, or really feeling the weight of choice, because I think that's another thing with Libra is it's not so much that they're indecisive, they just know how important choice is, and once you make one,
Sure.
and that could be the exalted Saturn that comes into that sign, like I make a choice, I'm to stick with it. And that's why it's
Well,
so hard to make one.
and in this decan, Mel, the Saturn ruled decan, so you're bound to that choice, right?
Yeah.
Right? You have a binding to it.
Exactly.
So
And so there's something to be said about, and you already brought this up a little bit earlier, but I'm just going to re-emphasize it, the few days that follow the new moon, because we do have obviously the sun and Mars starting their new cycle, and then Mercury retrogrades back on the 9th, Saturday, which might be the 10th if you are in Europe or elsewhere in the world, where there is the Kazemi of Mercury with the sun in its inferior position, but also that conjunction with Mars that happens on the same day that Venus, who is who has now moved into a sign where she's no longer in aversion, but she's on the south node that day. So Venus is on point to be drained, to have to
mhm.
release, to let go. to, like there's a pressure that's going to be applied to her within days of this new moon happening. And so I don't know if you have anything to say about that, Spencer, with Venus being so close to the south node, and so much of the new
Yeah,
moon
it's a great
energy
point.
happens when we push off the first couple days of it, right?
Yeah, great point. And I want to file away what you were saying about the Seven of Cups for the end of our reading here, because the I Ching reading that we had really reflects Venus in the third decan of Scorpio. So file that away, the words temptation, um, because I think we're going to see something that's presented to us that may be that feeling of too good to be true, or may not be, right for us moving forward. We have to be really careful. And you're talking about Venus changing signs within two days or so of this new moon, and then immediately joining the south node, or that severed body of a celestial dragon, celestial demon that would swallow up the lights of the sun or the moon at an eclipse period. And I think that Venus moving to Sagittarius says, what do you believe? And are you going to be able to release some of those cherished I know statements, be able to come into harmony with whatever is presented with you? Because I think that one of the things that stands in the way of a healthy partnership times is when people feel that they know what is best, and that they feel it with every conviction of every bone in their body. And, we've seen this North Node in Gemini really encouraging us to increase our ability to ask questions and to be able to say, well, maybe there's another way to think about this, right? Which is what Mercury likes to do, where the South Node in Jupiter's house is saying, I know this. This is how we should order this. This is what we should do. So I would resist the urge to make declarative statements, and I would maybe increase your ability to ask questions around this period of time. That's always a healthy way to start a negotiation, is to see if you can completely understand the person that you're working with first, rather than making an assumption and getting upset about it. Like that was one of the four agreements. So have you read the four agreements, Melissa?
I haven't. I have and I haven't. Like I read the actual agreements
Yeah.
themselves. They're not coming to me right
Yeah.
now, so they're not
It's
embedded.
great. It's a great little book,
Yeah.
Toltec wisdom. And then I think one of them is don't make assumptions, right? I think
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember all of them. Do your best. Don't make assumptions. Oh man, I'm gonna butcher the last ones, but I like that one about yeah. If anybody could put that in the chat box, that'd be great, because you could see how an effect it had. I mean, no, it's great stuff, and I think that the part about not making assumptions is important, because a lot of the conflicts that we have can come from just misunderstandings. So
Mm.
I think that, release old belief systems, get curious, recognize, and maybe this is a nice transition into uh, the next little phase of this, but this new moon is on a really interesting fixed star called Algorab. So you've been doing some research on Algorab, and I think this plays into the temptation type of story. What are some of the things that you found out about this fixed star?
Oh, what did I find out? Well, I before we go into the fixed star, I just want to say that I totally agree with you about, like, because I keep seeing in my head after you started talking about that, the idea of jumping to conclusions, which, cardinal air, that's forward momentum, that is acting, that is like a spark, and Sun, Mars, Mercury headed that way. Like the idea of jumping to conclusions, we might have to watch for that
Oh,
a
and we've
little
got
bit.
a few people helping us out here. Remco says, "Don't take anything personal," and
Mm.
then Kelly is saying, "Be impeccable with your word." Oh
Oh
man,
yes.
they really served us up
Yes.
for us to knock it out of the park with Algorab here. So tell us what you got.
Oh, okay. So, well, where are my notes? Oh, Algorab is an interesting star to begin with. When you go back and look about its implications with certain things, it actually is
Sure.
very active as at least in US situations with terrorism. And I'm not saying to scare anybody with that, but because I think we terrorize ourselves here every day, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, life is full of terror with the news and like what are we going to be afraid of? But it is the right wing of the crow in the Corvus
Mm.
constellation. And it is the nature of Mars and Saturn. So this is a fixed star, because if you don't know about fixed stars, they all have natures of certain planets. And when we put Mars and Saturn together, what do we have there? We got two malefics
Yeah.
doing their thing. And I love kind of a sum up of this. I'm going to leave the story to you,
Okay.
Spencer, with the crow and what it's one job. It had one job
Right.
to do,
It's
and
yeah,
it
one job.
he just had one job. And it's basically, it comes up when a variation of the truth, when we use a variation of the truth, or think that an excuse of some sorts would be safer, but it turns out to not be
Mm.
so. So when we
Yeah.
divert from the truth to try, when we think about things like little white lies, if I just, a little white lie can't hurt, right? Well, we were just talking about the snowball of cause and effect, where maybe not being totally upfront with something or trying to sugarcoat something, which I think Libra could do as well, like a sugarcoating. Um,
Yeah.
it's ends up not working in either our favor or the situation's favor, or if it's found out, the integrity of
Mm.
the messenger or the deliverer or the crow. Though you had one job, you couldn't do that. We asked this of you. And the integrity. And this makes me think about the whole United States and the debt ceiling again, too, because our integrity
Sure.
monetarily is on the line right now.
Well, and
Um,
Congress has one job right now, right?
it
And
has
they're
one job to do. And if it's
yeah.
not upfront and handles that job, but that's the thing with this star is it is alluding to the fact that that one
Mm.
job is not going to be done because there is a malefic energy at work for whatever reason.
Well,
Because
and
sometimes the
let's
job doesn't have to, it doesn't get done because there's a bigger storyline that wants to
right.
take place. I'll leave it at that though.
Well, and let's contextualize this for folks, and then we can kind of break it down and apply it, right? I probably should tell the story first, I guess, but
Oh, I
so
know.
the story,
Sorry.
that's okay, that's okay.
Jump
So
to
so for those of
conclusions.
you that see, there we go. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Algorab story, Corvus the crow. If you look in the sky, you can see the constellation of a crow next to what looks like a cup, and that is the cup or the goblet of Apollo. And both of them are sitting on top of a very long constellation called Hydra, which is the sea snake. So the story goes is that Corvus was given the task by Apollo to fill the sacred cup. And can infer whatever should go in that cup, but it's some kind of divine assignment that Corvus had received. And Corvus got distracted. Corvus got distracted by earthly delights, like maybe it was like a delicious fig or some kind of thing they wanted to eat, or some shiny object that crows are known to be distracted by. But the point being is that he to fulfill that task. And then when approached by Apollo, instead of up to the indiscretion, he blamed the sea hydra that he was riding on the back of, and hence Algorab's significations with dishonesty, with being glib, or gossip, or things where I think this really draws in one of the four agreements that our chat box has been so gracious of reminding us of, is be impeccable with your word. And Algorab failed to do that, and that caused, like you were saying, all sorts of extracurricular issues that wouldn't have been the case had you just owned up to the issue in the first place. And I think this is really, it really works for Mars and Libra, because I think one of the criticisms of Mars and Libra has been sit in the house of Venus. It's basically only being given the tools of Venus to do Mars things, right? So instead of being direct like Mars would want to be and say, "Oh, I want this," it's always kind of like doing this kind of circuitous fashion, this roundabout way. And you may think that you're avoiding a conflict and creating peace through this way, but it may be sowing the seeds of a future conflict that may be worse than if you'd originally just like dealt with it up front. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, how many of when you don't deal with something directly,
Yeah.
there's all these problems that start to surface within, and it could be problems that surface that we have to deal with outside of ourselves, and the cause and effect of like just not dealing with the situation that needs it. But it's also the cause and effect of not confronting something head on that might irritate us or make us angry, that then resorts to things like blame and resentment and piled
Mhm.
up anger that is not, that then can eat, that ends up blowing in some way, and it gets so out of proportion because it's not dealt with. So
Yeah.
we do have to look at that, like peace at what cost to some extent. And when you were talking about the crow and, because crows, they love some shiny objects. They're going to like, get distracted by the thing that comes into their awareness. And it made me start to think about the North Node and where it is now, and the fact
Mm.
that Venus is on point to basically oppose the North Node. And the North Node is in the decan of the Eight of Swords, which is the idea of interference and distraction,
Mm.
and
Right.
being called to the side. It's something getting in the way of the follow through in some respect, and usually it's ourselves that get in the in the way of that. And so you might want to ask yourself, what do I need to follow through with? What might be getting in the way of that, and where can I take decisive action? Because I like what Leah wrote earlier in the chat. She's talking about being in a sixth house perfection year, and that's Mars. I think that's Mars for her. I'd have to double check there. She says Mars seems to want me to advocate for my health versus sacrifice in a workplace situation, which
Mm.
results in big uncomfortable changes ahead. And I think that is an interesting point to this, because when I did my Libra season podcast with Tara All, I always ask guests at the end, if you had one word to describe this season, what would it be? Hers was to adapt, and I couldn't. She's like, what's yours? And I was having a hard time coming up with one. I just quieted my mind for a second, and what came up was defend. And I was like, oh,
Mm.
that's an interesting word to come up for, Libra season. But I'm starting to think about this ripe full moon that is a part of this Libra season in Aries, and the fact that Mars is on the sun and the moon there. And
Yeah.
and this goes back to the debility and the detriment that we were talking about earlier, about Mars's ability to do martial things. And so we might have to step up and defend. And that's why when Leah brought that up, like my mom always said, you have to be your own advocate. You can't have other people, you can't rely on other people to know your needs or to make choices for you or
Sure.
to stand up for your own best interest. And so that might be part of the discomfort here too, is it's like, if you don't stand up for yourself, who's going to do it? And yeah, you
Mm.
might upset the apple cart like along the way, or relationships might uh go through part separations or just disruption and conflict, which Mars is known for. But at the end of the day, like if it's very important, and you have to defend that position, and it's in your own best interest in a healthy way, because I don't think best interest and self-interest, or some people like to think it's selfish, is necessarily a bad thing when it is part of your survival, your well-being, and what you can then give back to your relationships in the world. So we're going to have to find the balance
Yeah.
between all that. Wow, that was really, I just did a snake dance there. I was Axl
You
Rosen all over the
deserve
place.
it. Yeah. I love this. One thing I think I will piggyback off what you're saying is that um, many of the Libra clients that I work with that have prominent Libra placements, not just the sun or whatnot, a lot of the times what I hear from them is the necessity of incorporating necessary conflict into their life. and not avoiding it, because I think that to be able to come into equilibrium and harmony, it does take, like you were saying, an ability to advocate not only for finding out what the other party needs, but also to find out what you need. Because, like you said, if you're giving up everything, that breeds resentment, because that's not an energetic exchange that can be sustained over the long term. And when we have those situations, then it starts to leak out in all these roundabout ways and all these Axel snake ways,
in passive aggressive ways, where
exactly.
and no one likes passive aggressiveness. A lot of us are passive aggressive. I find myself in that position more often than I'd like to be.
Well, we're cancers. We're
already crab walking,
Yeah, exactly. So that we live in the world of pouting and passive aggressiveness sometimes, I think. But I think that one of the things, just bringing it back to some of the universal themes that we're seeing, like in the news, and I discussed this a little with this other astrologer friend. A lot of the like negotiations with debt ceiling and things like that, I think, we're always seeing a lot of the politicians recently trying to distract us from really some of the more important issues that need to go down. They're always adding in new things. They're always like bringing up issues that aren't really important, to be able to like, don't look over here at this like power grab or money grab or whatever it is by other, I don't know, oligarchical forces, while at the same time pitting the people against one another. And I think this is really a key, is when you have people in power, and this really brings in some of the square Pluto that we're experiencing over the next month or so. Like on all these planets, the sun, Mars, Mercury, they're all going to be squaring Pluto in Capricorn throughout the month. There's always this kind of like, don't look at what we're doing over here. Go fight amongst yourselves so that we can do these things behind the curtain. And I was really encouraging the audience to not fall prey to that illusion, I guess, that Seven of Swords card, right?
Yes.
Where, that's when the populace loses power, is when they're fighting amongst themselves. And we've seen that for the last few years. Like, while we've been busy being so polarized, trivial, I think some things that are fairly real, we've had the powers that be, like the billionaires, getting really rich, over the course of the last 2 years. And we've had, climate issues that have come to a fever pitch. And, these elephants in the room, the like unequal distribution of wealth, the climate crisis that is really begging for us to deal with, while we squabble over like, I don't know, just stuff that isn't as important as those issues. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And what it makes me think of, Spencer, and the kind of the paradoxical situation that Mars and Libra brings up in this next cycle, is that, okay, so yeah, polarization, it's going to happen. Well, actually, one of the things that makes the free world, I'm going to say, I was going to say the US, but I think just the free world in general, because it's not just the US that is free. There's many countries that are founded on the idea of democracy and freedom. And my astrologer friend Christopher Taylor put it very well. Like, we have to disagree to be free. Like, that is the nature of freedom. And so here's this Mars in Libra under a Venus, rule, is that we're always going to disagree. We're always going to disagree. But do we let that polarize us? Do we let that conflict take us over? Or do we find peace in the fact that it's beautiful to be different? It's beautiful to have different points of view. And if we fight against that, that is what keeps our species torn. And I have
Yeah.
my clairvoyant friend, when we were talking about the pandemic and all the things along those lines, is they're like, she was like, well, what my guides were telling me with it, is it's not about like these solutions that we think these outside. And I'm not saying vaccine is good or bad or anything like that. It's not about that. It's actually about us being so polarized. Like we can start to heal ourselves and the situation by accepting and coming together, because this is the diversion, and we get sicker, not just in
Yeah.
pandemic world, but just as a populace. The more diverted we get, and we see the earth start to erupt, because we're all energy, we're all playing off that. And if there's this constant disruption and disharmony and energy, it affects everything that is around us. It's not just the pandemic, it's the climate crisis, it's all these things. And so this is a bigger topic than just this new moon, of course, but it makes me think about, especially Sun and Mars seeding in a new cycle here, about looking at polarity and diversion, and how it's very uncomfortable to be in this, tit for tat, back and forth, a disharmony. Like, how can we be proactive to peace?
Mhm.
Because that is, you look at some of the great war generals of time, you're going to see Mars and Libra. Like the
Yeah.
people that are able to actively end a conflict into an agreement, which we started off with agreements here with our talk, are these Mars and Libra people, right? Because it's not the consistency of keeping up the conflict that Mars is. It's no, we want to use its detriment in order
Mhm.
to bring peace about, if that makes sense, what I'm saying there.
No, it does. I mean, just because a planet is quote unquote dignified doesn't mean that it doesn't have a specific play in the celestial drama, that we're playing out here. And sometimes we have, maybe doing things in a slightly unorthodox way. Maybe it's not done in a pure martial fashion, but whatever that planet is needing to express, it may be doing it in just maybe a way that's not the norm, if that makes sense. Like for a war general to end conflict, like that's to be a negotiator, right? On some level, that seems to be the antithesis of what a war general might be traditionally thought of doing, which is crushing and destroying the enemy rather than
Yeah.
ending the conflict, right? So, really interesting point that you're bringing up with that. I just want to point out, thank you to Lisa for a super sticker there. We have this new feature on our channel
Oh,
where you can purchase a super sticker or a super chat, the little $sign in the chat box there, and that helps support the show. So thank you, Lisa, for using that feature. I appreciate that. Lisa's also saying Saturn is either the end of the dream and Uranus comes to reconcile these opposites. Yeah, we that's really the backdrop of this entire year, the Saturn Uranus square that we're going
oh
through.
yeah.
The old and the new, shaking up the routine and binding us to some kind of new structure type of thing. Um, so I think we've done a pretty good job with Algorab and with the this lunation here. Any other thoughts with this new? Miss anything with this one in particular?
Oh, geez. I mean, we could go on for days about it, really. But I don't think it's something that we pointed out yet before. And it's a very simple concept, but this is a new moon in a cardinal sign.
Yeah.
And as we push forward with a first quarter in Capricorn, a full moon in Aries. These are all starting points. These are all pivot points. This is when things begin. This is when
Hmm.
the situation turns. This is not a stabilizing energy. This is not, we've already moved through the adaptation and the versatility of the mutable. Like this, we're beginning. So, like, think about what is beginning for you, even though we're in fall now. So there is the idea of harvest and, like that changing too. But if we're sowing these new seeds that are actually seeds of beginnings and starts, and where our headspace is at with this, the mental component, because this is air, and the very real, what's the word I'm trying to think about, the reality that there can be a lot of anxiety within all this, because when we have so much air at place, like we got to get in our bodies. We are can be very anxious. The answers are not in our head, they're in our heart. So how do we translate the heart to the head instead of the head to the
Mm.
heart? So we'll say that. But if we are at this point where we pivot and we start, let's be very conscious about what we are creating here, because I think one of the things we have not talked about actually, Spencer, is the fact that Pluto stations direct this day, which we can't
Yeah.
quite see in the chart because it still looks like it's retrograde, but
Just move it forward one day. There it
yeah,
is.
you can move
Going
it for a
direct.
couple hours and you'll see that
Yeah.
it goes direct. Saturn goes
Mhm.
direct on the 10th, a few days after that, and then Jupiter
Oops.
and Mercury go direct on the 17th and 18th, right before the full moon. So we have all the waxing portion of this new moon cycle with major outer planet and Mercury stations. And Wade Caves put it the other day in a webinar I was watching. He was like, it kind of made him a little nervous just because when so many, superior planets station like that at the same time, it's like there's a concentration of energy, and he's known it to
Yeah.
really affect structures, whether that's structures, infrastructures, structures of, when we're talking about the government and things along those lines. So there's so much potency that is tied up in this time of year, and really these outer planet stories that we've been following, and that Mercury is taking us through with its retrograde journey on its own, that is going to do a whole switcheroo in the first 2
Yeah.
weeks of this new moon cycle. So maybe, what do you think about that, Spencer, with Pluto? Well, Pluto
Yeah.
stationing, see, that means business to me. And
Yeah.
then Saturn just on the coattails and all that.
Yeah. You bring up a great point about cardinal sign and their ability to kind of bring in some kind of initiate a new season or a new narrative. And I would add that we're initiating the fall and we're initiating the season in the northern hemisphere, at least the season of contraction. I think that it's a place where the sun is weakest, right? Where the traditionally thinking where our own self interest becomes less um, fluid to express, and we have to start thinking in a more Saturnian way, maybe more universally, maybe more about the other or that which is in exile rather than our own personal needs. So yeah, I agree 100%. I wanted to bring something up while you were talking about that. As far as the Pluto stuff goes, I have a Sibley chart queued up here,
Yes,
and I
we
thought
do
it'd be
need to talk
pretty.
about that. This
I
is
think it'd be pretty
important.
interesting to see this here. So what I've got is my computer is struggling through switching these charts around. But what I wanted to show you is that on this new moon, we have, it's really in the place of an important point in America's chart where we've got Saturn at 14 degrees of Libra in the United States natal chart. Also, a couple of things that are happening here is, Pluto's turning direct. This is where we talk about the Pluto return of the United States, where Pluto is returning after 250 plus years to the original position that it was in when America was founded as a country. The other thing we're seeing is Saturn conjoining the South node, in Aquarius here, almost exact, and Saturn being the ruler of the second and the third house in America's chart. This brings up really interesting topics, doesn't
Oh,
it?
Spencer, it
like,
is so, I
like,
mean, you cannot, if anybody questions if astrology is real, all you got to do is look at the US's chart and the
yeah.
current configurations, because it is so on point. Yeah,
Well,
because what
it's double Saturn with as far as the financial things you were talking about, right? Because we have a contact with the natal Saturn, also the transiting Saturn is they're both in positions of hardship, I would say right now, wouldn't you say?
Yes. And so just a quick rundown of like all that's happening here, is, as Spencer pointed out, we have the new moon on on Saturn in the U.S. Sibley chart. That new moon is also squaring the U.S.'s sun, which is the ruler of its ninth house.
Hmm.
Things like courts and agreements and the Congress itself. Then we have basically Saturn on the south node, and that draining that happens on the south node there in the third house, which I'll bring in a little bit more about what that could mean. And then Pluto stationing direct in an opposition to Mercury retrograde in the US's chart, which also happens to be where Mercury stationed in Libra. So when Mercury stationed retrograde in that trine to Jupiter, in that square to Pluto, it was activating this Pluto Mercury opposition that is nearly exact in the chart. And what we have to remember too is as Pluto moves forward, because we are on course here in America, and I know not everybody is interested in American politics, especially if you're overseas, although it is a fascinating astrological story, is that Pluto is on course to make its first conjunction in February to the US's Pluto. So this is the kind of the go time of like, oh, right, here it's coming. And so two things. Here we see this T square happening between the second, the eighth, and the 11th house of the U.S. Sibley chart. And those are all money houses. You know, the second house is the assets. The eighth house is the debt. The 11th house is the money that comes from the institution or the government itself. And so these are all being triggered as we go through this U.S. debt ceiling crisis that is putting us at risk if they don't raise the debt ceiling to be in a position of default, which we have never been in. And if it defaults, it's going to affect the global market. It's going to affect the credibility of not only the United States, but it's going to affect the credibility of the Treasury loan system in general, because the treasury, like loaning money from country treasuries, is the most like stable way of money moving around. And the only reason we got into this kind of like debt ceiling thing and why it keeps climbing is actually in like the 19th century. You know, we've been borrowing money for a long time, but you used to have to go to different countries with the actual bill or the measure in place of what you wanted to borrow money from. But in the 20th century, they're like, well, let's fast track this and just make a debt ceiling so that we don't really have to go with these individual issues. We'll just be like, well, we can guarantee this much debt, you know, like, and so we can just keep borrowing from you. And so the debt just kept raising and raising and raising. And now it's at a point where is this bipartisanship and people going back and forth, these Plutonian power struggles, the Plutonian blame. Let me blame someone else across the aisle that, you know, that it's their fault. And so nothing is getting done. And we get into this stalemate while we are putting our country's credibility on the line. And where it's coming into effect, obviously, is that second house of the money, the eighth house of the debt. But what the issue that's sliding into it and why people are, you know, the Republicans are filibustering it is because of, you know, the Democrats wanting to bring in spending measures for things such as infrastructure that is crumbling, which is a third house, Saturn on the south node. They want to bring in money to deal with our supply chains that are not coming through, which is a very second house and third house measure as well. And so there's these third house issues that are tied up in the actual money and what we need it for, that is jamming up and clogging up the system with the power struggle. And the irony of all this is that they thought there was going to be a government shutdown because the government actually goes on some sort of vacation at the end of September, and they thought that they weren't coming to any type of agreement, and so they thought there was going to be a government shutdown where, you know, thousands and thousands of people would be out of work, but they passed it just in time to extend that so that people could still be employed through December 3rd, which happens to be the solar eclipse that's coming, but there still is the deadline for the debt ceiling and us defaulting on our loans that is set for October 18th when Jupiter and Mercury station direct. And
Right.
Mars is trining Jupiter at the same time. And it's right before the Aries full moon that is going to be square Pluto with Mars square Pluto. That was a lot, I know. But that is essentially the story that the US is working with right now.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to see the connections play out with the United States chart. One thing that just popped up when you were talking about all of that is that, this Mercury Pluto opposition in the United States chart, I think about the third decan of Cancer. I actually have Mercury like 2 degrees away from this Mercury. So I've lived this Mercury. And one of the things that is interesting about it is it talks about the realization that someone benefiting will take away from somebody else.
Mm,
So, like Hecate is a daimon associated with that decan. So, Hecate was like this, this a lunar deity that was kind of associated with death and crossroads and things of nature. But we have this argument where we're arguing with the government and we're arguing with each other about who should be taxed, who shouldn't, the rich getting richer and taking from the poor. You know, we've built this country on some really various things, including
yes.
slavery and things like that. So those are also those issues of, for this great mass of wealth to be begotten, we had to oppress somebody else, and that's really going to be, we're going to have to reckon with that with Pluto. Pluto says, hey, this is the reckoning moment. This is something where you're going to have to, you've repressed underneath the ground, like Hades, this corrupt type of thing. And Pluto, I always call Pluto that, I used to call it the clogged toilet planet, but I've been saying this ad nauseum now, but I think it's the plunger, where it says, all right, this toilet's been clogged for 250 years. It's time for all the shit to like bubble up to the surface. And you're going to have to deal with cleaning it up. And some of that is I think the wealth inequality that we've had due to our history and things of that nature. So I wonder if, a lot of the calls have been about proper taxation of the rich and the top 1% of things like that. So that's part of this equation.
Mm.
Maybe we'll see something about redistributing wealth to people that have historically been oppressed or on the fringe or that have been exiled. But again, you were talking about, you know, the government has one job right now, and that's to like stay functioning. And they're trying
Yes.
to bring all this other stuff in to distract from that one job. And it's just so fascinating that the 18th date is going to be so prevalent because, like you said, just to run down those dates again, we've got the new moon on the 6th, we've got Saturn stationing direct on the 10th, we have the before that, the Mars Cazimi on the 8th, the Mercury Cazimi on the 9th, and then the 18th, just all this stuff happened.
It's
Jupiter direct, Mercury direct. Mercury makes its heliacal rise on the day also, so it becomes what means it becomes visible. So really important messages taking place.
it's
I
like a
have a feeling that we're
deluge.
gonna, yeah. My hope is that through the impetus of a deadline that will just get worked out and it'll finally be a deal. But the only thing that really gives me a lot of pause with that is that we are going to experience Sun Saturn square, right, by whole sign, just as the sun moves into Scorpio. And we're getting a
Yeah.
little bit of ahead of ourselves, but knowing that that's on the horizon, where frustrated movement, where it feels like gridlock, that could represent something where they just can't get their poop
They
together
can't get their shit
and work
together.
it out. Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
So we'll see.
Yeah. And that's
We'll
what those
see.
stations just concentrating. I do want to bring up what Aaron's saying in the chat, and thank you for that clarification. He says, for the record, the US government does not go on vacation at the end of September. That he laughs. That is, I feel like they're on vacation all the time personally, but that is simply the
Right.
end of the fiscal year, which is right. The
Mhm.
new fiscal year starts on October 1st. Consequently, either a new budget or a continuing resolution is necessary at that time in order to continue to fund government agencies and services. So that's why we
Right.
have that deadline. Is they're not necessarily going anywhere, but where have they been to begin with? But
Sure.
that there is that pressure there. And, when we're looking at that chart with that Pluto opposition to Mercury, a debilitated Mercury retrograde in the eighth house, ruling the seventh house of the US Sibley chart. And you wonder why we have inner faction fighting within. We are our own enemy most of the time. Mercury's an aversion to that seventh house space. And there's always these subjective viewpoints that come in, which is very Cancerian water energy. There is subjectivity that comes along with that placement. And so having Pluto opposing that Mercury, which is in charge of the seventh house there, it really just
And we always
shows.
think that we're right with the
Well, we always think that we're right. We always think that we're right with
like,
foreign relations. We always think
right.
we're right within the, like
Yeah.
we are. And that's when we brought up the idea of like, when I was talking about terrorism before, with Algorab, because has been associated with the World Trade Center attack on 9/11, the World Trade Center bombing that happened, because it is right on
the ascendant. The ascendant was right on that 14-degree place
the ascendant
when
and
World Trade
Mercury.
Center, right when the World
Yeah.
Trade Center bombing happened, exactly right on the United States Saturn.
In the when on 9/11, when the planes flew in, that was yeah. And we have all this stuff going on with Afghanistan that is changing right now. And so they're basically, we are in a hot spot. And to add to that with the new moon, because if we draw the chart up for the new moon and where that sun, moon, Mars falls in the chart in the world, angularly speaking, that falls on the ascendant of the East Coast of the United States, with New York and Philadelphia and not far from Washington. So it is an angular new moon for the United States, as it is for places like Ecuador, Panama, Cuba, Montreal in Canada. And it's culminating in Norway, Denmark, Germany, Italy, Libya, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon. I think I'm saying that right. But I know Germany's got a lot of stuff going on right now too within their government. And so there's something to be said about these places. It's setting in China, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, which is always interesting, because when we have a chart that puts an important configuration on the ascendant of the US, it's always going to set in China, because we're exactly halfway across the world. So that's probably why they are our partners in many ways, but it's also why they can be our enemies at times too. And when I think about the debt ceiling being compromised, I know that we owe a lot of money to China. So there could be something along those lines. And
that's really interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it
that
did play.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's interesting how that works.
Well,
yeah. So.
I guess I would say try not to lose hope. If you're out there in the world, it can get really, it's easy to get really overwhelmed by some of these macrocosm issues. I think that if I were to kind of try to ground people a little bit with this energy, I would say that it's important to hold your leadership accountable. But also it's important to try to find common ground with your neighbor, rather than pointing all the fingers at the powers that be, right? I think that sometimes peace starts right in your backyard. And by changing yourself, you are contributing to changing the collective. And I really think that part of especially in the third decan of Libra, where all this stuff's going to be squaring Pluto in Capricorn 3, which is bureaucratic systems with Capricorn 3, really. Libra 3 is really about finding inner peace and bringing peace to chaotic situations. So we may see lots of things going crazy around us, but we have to be that center of peace. And then we bring that peace to the circumstances that we're at, rather than always being like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to be peaceful until everything around me is perfect or safe or sane, because that's just not how life works. Life is
It will
always in
never
motion.
happen.
It'll never happen, right?
It'll
So
never happen.
so if we're always in motion like this, we're going to have to be the center of the wheel. We're going to have to be the eye of the hurricane, and we each can make a choice individually to be that, rather than adding tension to the mix. um, and that's been just really something I've been meditating on every single day, is how can I be that voice of peace? How can I find peace within myself, so that even if the shit's hitting the fan, I can, remain centered. Um, so that's what I would offer to our audience today, as something to try to cultivate through whatever means it is for you. It could be through journaling, could be through meditation, it could be through turning the news off for a period of time. That's what I've been doing the last few weeks. Is I used to have all these notifications about news stories, and I
Ooh.
couldn't keep up with it. And I finally had to be like, I need to be more um, conscious about what I am taking in every day. Doesn't mean that I put my head in the sand and don't pay attention. It just means that there are certain time periods that I'm going to engage with it, and right before bed is not the right time to be
No, it's the worst
scrolling through your
time.
phone, right? So allow yourself some time to rest, like that, right? Like that Four of Swords card that we see in the third decan of Libra. And then you will be able to make better choices in the moment, right? In that Kairos moment, when you are faced with saying, it's go time. You're going to be more clear-headed. You're not going to be as like frazzled. I just think that is the one of the solutions, I think, right now, is finding your own center first. I'm not advocating uh, abdicating your responsibilities, but I am saying that you're going to make better choices if you slow down and if you find a little bit of flow, right?
Yeah,
Um,
that's well, that talks what we were talking about earlier with anxiety and centering yourself in your body. And that's what meditation does for us. And meditation isn't just, like laying down and and breathing. That's a very important breath work could be a
right.
wonderful. If you're not already doing some sort of breath work, I think that this is the perfect time to start that with that cardinal energy. But it can
Yeah.
be things like active meditation too, where you just take a nice walk and you get some fresh air and you just clear your mind, because it's very rare occasions are good decisions made from a place of anxiety. We have
Right.
to center ourselves. We have to get to that, get out of the head enough to go with the gut and go with the heart space. And that makes me think about just actually Venus being in Scorpio,
Mm.
within all of this, because it is from an emotional place. It is more from a heart and a gut than it is overthinking everything. And so we have to bridge, it's another Libra word, bridge. We have to bridge the gap between that heart and that head space, and centering yourself is definitely the way to do that.
Well, and Remco's making a good point here. Remco says the centering action feels like the pivot axes of the Wheel of Fortune card,
Mm,
which I love that. And look at what else we have with a natal chart. We have a wheel. I mean, and we can either get cast about by the turning of the wheel, where sometimes we're at the top of the wheel, sometimes we're at the bottom, sometimes it's about us, sometimes it's about the other. But if we connect with the center, then we're cast about less by all the twists and turns of fate and of fortune. Again, I would reiterate, it doesn't mean that we refuse the call, like Joseph Campbell would say for the hero. Sometimes we try to refuse the call, but if we have a heroic journey that we have to go on, an action that we need to take, usually based on conflict coming up, it always works out better if we're level-headed, right? If we've
yeah,
done some of that work.
because
Uh,
we are headed to that Aries full moon on the 20th. And so I think what you just said, Spencer, is very
yeah.
apropos for what's coming.
Well, and now what I've got queued up here is the first quarter of this lunar phase, where we see the moon that's in Capricorn, and the sun has moved into that third decan of Libra, which speaks to coming into balance, coming into equilibrium, the minor adjustments that need to take place. And the moon is activating Pluto at this first quarter square. What do you think about this first material challenge that we have here in this lunation phase?
Well, it is definitely going to give us the precursors
Yeah.
to what that full moon in a T square with Pluto and in Mars, which is just inching ever so closely to the square, is going to bring up. And so I mean, I don't want to get too ahead of myself or even like ahead of the broadcast, but when I
Yeah.
think about the full moon that's coming with Aries, and even when we were talking about the debt ceiling crisis, just
Mm.
the word crisis, because Aries is known for crisis, especially with a full moon. And crisis can look different to different people or what is even considered a crisis. And having a first quarter in an earth sign on Pluto, pretty much, that is pushing the story forward is that there is going to be some sort of activation that is very real.
Mm.
Like this is business, this is the economy, this is our own bank accounts, our own work schedule, having work, not having work, just the structure of our lives moving forward in a very tense way that is once again back to the pivot energies, that cardinal R. And I love what Remco was saying about the wheel, because that is the card that the wheel is turning basically then. And when we think about pivot energy, especially in terms of Cancer and Capricorn, which are solstice energies, these are more extreme pivots that get underway. So even though the pivot of the Libra and the Aries energy that is part of this lunar cycle is more pivots that are a little more balanced, there's an extreme nature that comes with Capricorn on the material realm. And so we are probably going to all be faced with something along those lines. It obviously plays very well into what we were talking about with the whole US and the money crisis and things along those lines, and how that could affect everyone too, because like we said, we're just not isolated as a country,
Right.
as people. Like we are in a global economy, we're in a global world. So if things like that are, as the pressure is going to be on them, right? That 17th, 18th deadline is going to be
Mm.
very apparent.
Yeah.
And it could
It's
affect us all, like it does affect us all.
and I'm
And
gonna keep
so I
moving the
think
chart forward here.
I
And
think
like you were
that is
saying,
going to be
this
what's going to
day
go
right
on.
here, the 18th, what we've been kind of pointing out, all these watch what happens over the course of this day. To keep an eye on Mercury and Jupiter here. So we've got Mercury is going to be turning direct. Jupiter turns direct here. Um, Here goes Mercury. Eventually, there it is.
There it is.
And then that's also Mercury's heliacal rise, where it's outside of the 15-degree, um, aspect of the sun, I guess the distance of the sun, which means that it becomes visible again. And anytime a planet becomes visible, literally visible in the sky outside of the light beams of the sun, we get important messages from that planet. So we will get important messages on the 18th about what's going to happen moving forward. And this is true for all of you personally as well. If you really examine the Libra area of your chart and the topics associated with that house, I really think that many different parts of your life are going to be affected by that particular area because of the stack up here in Libra. Look at the Leo area of your chart, look at the Scorpio and the Aries area of your chart for Mars, look at the Gemini and Virgo area of your chart for Mercury. Okay, so this is something where everything's going to be filtered through this particular topic. Expect messages around this period of time, personally and within the collective. And again, that's going to be building up to this full moon that we have here on the 20th. So there's our full moon at about 27 degrees of Aries, right? And yeah, that decan's really about
Yeah.
charisma, isn't it? Like charisma, winning over the hostile crowd. Maybe we have to finally, do the final negotiations where we say, this is what I really want, and schmooze somebody. I don't know.
Well, it
Maybe.
is Venus in Aries, the decan for that full
Yeah,
moon that's
exactly. It's
coming.
a Venus decan for sure.
Yeah.
So some powerful energies that are coming up throughout the first few weeks of October for sure.
So a little fun fact to go back to the first quarter in Capricorn, which I was reading when I was going down debt crisis lane.
Hmm.
What was there's an actual solution, an interesting solution. This brings up definitely Saturn square Uranus
Hmm.
energies. But supposedly, and they discovered this back in the Obama era because we actually had a debt ceiling crisis back in 2011 too. That we got through. But apparently, there is an obscure law that allows the US government to mint platinum coins in any denomination.
Hmm.
And so the US Treasury Secretary could actually mint a coin of a value of $1 trillion, like a $1 trillion coin to
Right.
deposit if, into the Fed, if people can't, the president can make that executive call,
Yeah.
so that we don't have to worry about the debt limit. But what that brings up is this whole idea of worth and value. What is that? And Bitcoin has been like, has been bringing up that the whole time. Cause I mean, I'm still trying to understand Bitcoin. I'm like, what's the value? China just banned Bitcoin.
Mm.
That was big. And so I thought this was just a funny little story. And there's even people like, uh, doing hashtag, MTFC, which is mint the F and coin, basically, to get us out of this thing.
Well,
And so I thought that was
yeah, the whole
interesting.
thing with Bitcoin and government systems trying to ban that, to me, and this is just like off the top of my head, like personal opinion thought, that seems to be like the government saying, we don't have control over the currency
Oh,
anymore
yes.
and we want it back, because these cryptocurrencies seem to be like the people saying, we're not even going to participate in your fiat currency inflation bullshit anymore. We're going to just have our own means of exchange that can't be taken from us willy nilly. And that's threatening to, I don't know, I guess powers that be, oligarchical people that want to control the markets so that they can make a lot of money. And you bring up a really interesting point about the nature of value. The fact that we can just print off a coin and say, "Oh, it's done,"
Yeah.
it's crazy. Like that's the nature of fiat currency, which is something that is not supported by a gold standard anymore, right? We used to have money, these paper bills that were supported by physical gold in like Fort Knox or some shit like that. And now we just print out money when we feel like it. And those are the types of things that lead to inflation
Yeah.
and the devaluing of the dollar or currency that eventually can make it very expensive for people to buy basic things.
Yes.
When your dollar becomes devalued due to inflation, that's when a gallon of milk starts to cost $100 or $1. Like in some countries, like you were talking about Croatia or whatnot, one of their dollars is now you need like a million of them to have the same value that they may have had, maybe even 50 years ago or whatnot. So that's why you see let's have $1 million peso or something like that, like bill. There's all sorts of ways that inflation can wreak havoc on the average citizen. So it's just so interesting that we're trying to figure out. I think that's one of the biggest things, especially in America, but also as a global community. How do we assign value to things? How can we make it so that it's fair for the most amount of people rather than just this select few that doesn't really care about whether the common person has enough or whether the common person has a functional planet to live on. I think, again, that's
Mm.
the elephant in the room, isn't it? We're getting to the point in late stage capitalism where we've exhausted all of the resources of this beautiful, beautiful planet and gotten into this mistake that we have unlimited growth potential and we're not acknowledging the very essence of Libra season, which is contraction, which is rest, which is allowing the soil to restore itself over the winter hibernation season. And with this, like with American capitalism in particular, it's always this push to keep moving, keep going, keep doing, keep expanding, keep growing. And if you take it one step further with like the crops that we're growing with industrialized farming, like they don't have any nutrients anymore because we haven't allowed that soil to rest. We've only grown one thing for
Yeah.
decades, and we have to get in touch with the beauty of decay, the beauty of contraction, the necessary rest as a species, or it's going to be enforced on us by this wise organism that is Gaia, that is Mother Earth, right? That is this enclosed system that we need to work with in partnership with, rather than feeling like we are completely in control of it. Because this is what you see with climate change, with the and the billionaire solution to this. Sorry for my small rant, but the billionaire solution is, let's go fuck up another planet. Let's go
Yeah.
live on some other
Go to
planet
Mars. Let's go to, yeah.
yeah, rather than fix our own. And it's we're going to see an increase in with the increase in temperatures, the increase in natural disasters, the increase in instability, which is basically this planet saying, I'm sick, I need rest, I'm going to create a fever, and you are going to either disappear from my system, or you're going to like play nice. So it's not about let's save the earth, it's let's save ourselves, let's save our ability to live here, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, because it's true. We are a reflection of, or the larger organism is a reflection of all that lives upon it.
Yeah.
And so if we are sick, and most of us are, I mean, sick is not just sick in the body. We have literally manifested a pandemic, which is actual sickness. Because usually
Right.
when it gets sick to the body, that is like the last stage. But there's so much about humanity that is sick and out of balance, like you're saying, and it reflects upon it's the host organism and the mother. I think of it like, Mother Earth being like this dog that has fleas on it. And I don't want to liken us to fleas, of course. No one
Sure.
wants that image, but to some extent, if something is blood sucking
Hmm.
and like irritating, what the dog is going to itch, it's going to shake, it's going to, and so we see all these natural disasters, and it's
Yeah.
just part of the process. And I love what you say, Spencer, about us needing to heal ourselves. We need to work on ourselves, and it all starts individually. We're
Hmm.
talking about an Aries full moon, and we get there, and there's nothing wrong with being focusing on the self when it's in a healthy way, when it's in that meditative way and that centering way, and in the needs, like very basic survival needs in a positive way, so that we can, not survive, but thrive. uh, this is the start of the solution for everything.
Hmm.
But we're trying to find the solution outside of ourselves. We're trying to point blame and saying you're the problem,
Yeah.
and we're all the problem. I hate saying that, but we're all the problem.
And and
And
and and you know what? You know what that gives us? We're also all the solution. If I
yes,
if I play the Libra game here,
please play the Libra game.
like, because we may all be the problem, when we decide to become the solution, when we decide that we as a group are more powerful than the small individuals that may be bad players, that's when we really start to make the change. But we're not going to be able to make that shift if we continue to just to think of ourselves as individuals. Yes, we have to take personal responsibility, but we also have to realize that our personal actions do affect other people, that actions in America do affect other countries. They do. This is why I have an international crowd here, Melissa, because I acknowledge that fact. And a lot of people in our country don't, because I'm like, yeah, I get it. The bullshit that we do here really does have an effect on other people, and we should learn to
Yes.
be more responsible about that and not be these isolationist cowboys. So speak truth to power, right? I think that we can, if we do acknowledge that we have a problem, that's the first challenge, is acknowledging that we really are in a crisis point. That's when we use the beautiful human ability to innovate and to be adaptable and to be able to find these solutions by banding together. So I'm not trying to be like airy fairy, like, about it, but I really do think that with this Saturn Jupiter conjunction in air signs, it's really important to really acknowledge that we do have the ability to come together as a species to figure this out, and we have to. We don't have a choice. right? That's the thing. That's what people mistake right now, especially with it's frustrating because the pandemic, you'd think that with a pandemic, that would have been like the moment where people are like, oh shit, I better like, I better, figure this out or my, everyone's going to die. Like, and it is a little bit disheartening sometimes that even something as serious as that, people are still bickering with one another about like minor things, like about their freedoms and things like that. Um, but I do think that with the bigger changes that the earth is facing, it's kind of put up or shut up time. Like people need to like make this shift and put pressure on the people that are the power brokers to put pressure on things like the 100 corporations that make 70% of the pollution that we're dealing with global climate change and crisis. But here's the key, and this is the turnaround, and then we'll move forward and wrap it up. I think that the real turnaround with this is that when we think about corporate entities, government entities, those corporations are going to respond to us and what our desires are as a collective. Because if we say, we're not going to spend any more money on your bullshit product because you aren't acting in integrity, that's when people are like, those folks are like, oh no, we're not going to make money anymore. We better change something. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah,
So you vote with your dollar.
always.
If the only language that these folks understand is monetary, then that's your power. You vote with that dollar. You say, I'm not going to buy these products anymore. I'm going to boycott, like an Amazon boycott or something like that. That's how you get to those people and say, this is how we are going to work as a society. You do not have all the power because we're not going to give it to you anymore. So that's kind of my thought on that. And how do we overcome the bigger mechanizations, right? What do you think?
Yeah. I totally agree with that, and something I've been preaching on my podcast for quite
Yeah.
some time now. And I think that's a really a role of Uranus and Taurus. Is if you want to uh, evolve and shake up the financial structure that is not doing us well, that your power is in your money, and everyone has some money for the most part, and so
Yeah.
you're holding some sort of power, except we give it away all the time and we don't realize it. And so I think that is a very important point. And actually, Spencer, there was one thing that I did
Oh,
want to bring
one
up
more?
about the first quarter
Okay.
moon that
I'll
we
put it
kind of
back up.
glossed over.
Sure.
If you can go to the first quarter moon
Yeah,
chart
yeah,
with
yeah.
the Capricorn, is we didn't point out that Venus, now in Sagittarius, having gone through the South Node, is actually in a sextile to Saturn that day. And
Mm.
so we see our new moon representatives of domicile ruler Venus and exaltation ruler Saturn coming together in an opportunity. Especially since the Saturn is, the ruler of Capricorn as well in that first quarter. And I'm not going to say that's the answer to everything. It's just it just gives us a door. It gives us a door to start those negotiations, or to kind of like open to the bigger picture and the more the Sagittarius energy that goes there, and maybe like repositioning the mutability there to start to do something different. There's a listening to the Saturn to some extent. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I just wanted to
Yeah.
kind of bring that up before we closed out that first quarter energy, because it did seem like someone's playing ball a little bit then.
I like that. I like that it's you know, we're coming to terms with reality. I think that that's a sober influence. I think that this is something where it's like, okay, we know that we've got to get rid of some old belief systems, and now we're ready to do the reality check, right? I think anytime a planet, comes in contact with Saturn, it's definitely like, all right, we know this isn't our favorite thing to do, but we've got to suck it up and kind of do it. And I think Venus is going through that process when it's making its contact with Saturn here.
And being the negotiator, as Venus,
Right.
like open to the negotiations and the fairness and what's going to work here. And having gone through the South Node, she's done what she's needed to do, and she's more on course for other than that square to Neptune, but
Yeah.
she's on course to work with some of that Aquarius energy. So hopefully there'll be some lightning there. And it could be off of what Kelly is saying down in the chat. She was like saying, speaking of action and truth, do you have any thoughts of the triple conjunction at 16 degrees Libra on October 9th? And that's when we were talking about that inferior. And we talked about this a little earlier in the program, Kelly, but that I feel like that is a deciding moment for a lot of what could take place at first quarter, because there is something to be said about the sun lighting up Mars, lighting up Mercury, and the truth, what's revealed, what's even downloaded within ourselves, that it can be an activating force for decision making, and coming to certain terms with things, and these binding contracts that we started this whole conversation around, like contractual agreements and the right
well,
time.
and Mercury and Mars come together too. Maybe
Yes.
the negotiations are probably going to be a little heated. I would say
Always.
I would say watch your words. I think that
For agreements.
Exactly. Like be true to your word. You have integrity with your word. I think that you can an agreement, a negotiation can break down in a second if you're not following the social graces that are necessary, the back and forth, right? If you just like pop off and like fuck you, like someone can leave the negotiating table completely, and then you're back at square one, and you're not going to be able to get back to harmony as easily. So I would resist that temptation to like blow someone off completely or blow up verbally around that period of time with that conjunction. It's going to take patience. It's going to take you being centered. It's going to take a time out. It's okay to take a time out and say, I need to collect myself a little bit, right? Rather than just like, in the moment getting all flustered. So yeah. All right. Do we have anything else with the full moon? You feel pretty good about that?
A full moon is a broadcast in itself.
Yeah, and it will be. So we'll see you again around that time to talk about the full moon. So I'm going to stop my share for a second here, and I wanted to talk, Melissa. We're going to wrap this up today with an I-Ching reading and an animal of the day. So let's start with the I-Ching here. The I-Ching that I pulled was number 44, which roughly translates to encounter, temptation. I'm going to go through a list of translations. Coming to meet, the coupling of opposites, two ships passing in the night, hidden dangers, the beginning of corruption, and a need to nip problems in the bud. So this is changing to the hexagram 6, which roughly translates to conflict, contention, arbitration, demanding justice, and speaking out. And we have one changing line. Number 3. And number 3 says, this is a funny one, sort of, but it points to something really important. It says, there is no skin on his buttocks. Some translations call it the thighs. And walking is hard going. Danger, but no great blame. So this 44 is a temptation. I remember I was saying that remember this card, the 7 of Cups here, and you've got your other deck there that you were showing us. Because I think that there you go. Whatever is coming up at this, new moon, it may not necessarily be the right thing for you. Like Algorab, it may be a distraction, and you have to get clear on what is the right thing for you that is in alignment with your integrity. It could be an attractive possibility. But one of the things about this line, no skin on the buttocks, right? Like this was about not being able to move forward. And in all of the research I was doing, it was saying that you may be held back by circumstances, and that could cause some vacillation and unhappiness and frustration, but count your blessings because that divine roadblock could be saving you from yourself, from getting involved in something that may not actually be right for you. So I think that's really interesting. Do you have any thoughts on 44 and 6 here?
Well, yeah, there's the idea of the coupling. Another reference I have in one of my books is resisting weakness, for that as well. And it's interesting, the hexagram itself is heaven over wind, like the celestial self over the wind, which of course we are talking so much about airy things with Libra. And some of the things that came up is, like you said, the coming together, will the relationship last, a powerful force that can change you, but might not be in your life forever. Because sometimes something comes in and blows through like a gust of wind and we're forever changed by it. We're just a fateful meeting or a crossing of paths, kind of waltzes in and waltzes out. And it's almost like just that union in that moment was powerful enough to change a course.
Right.
Some other things that reference was bringing up was holding fast to one's ethics,
Mm.
and a conscious effort of being strong within your own character. And that's when that resisting weakness comes up, and understanding that, your agenda is not set by the people that are around you per
Mm.
se. Because if that other person is so strong, and might not be that good for you, do you want to align your life with someone else's agenda that might not be in your best interest? So you don't want to let weaker people set your direction. And that's the idea of resisting weakness. And so the changing line of the three, like kind of smack dab in the middle, but at the bottom of the first trigram. I liked one of the interpretations that came up talking about back and forth, right? Because Libra can be very back and forth.
Right.
And it says, and the question it brought up is, isn't it time to free yourself of this influence of going back and forth,
The vacillation, right?
The vacillation. Because until you stand firm against it, you live in constant danger of living under its control. So that's also the idea of resisting weakness from not making a decision. And the Rush song that I sang to everyone earlier, is that even if you are uncertain, sometimes and this goes with the Seven of Cups too, sometimes you have to decide what you want and go for it with determination, because sometimes there's not always 100% in a choice we have to make. And if we're always waiting for that 100%, we might never get to the choice. And so that is part of the changing line here, and why we have to take responsibility for the situation, even if it's awkward, uncomfortable, could be hard work, doesn't allow us to rest in some way, or we didn't ask for it. We didn't want it to begin with, but here it is, type of thing.
And isn't some of the pain really in the indecision itself? Sometimes once we make the choice, it's such a relief, even if it turns out in the future to be the quote unquote wrong choice, it gives us valuable information so we can make an adjustment. So
it allows us to move forward,
right,
is what it does. And so the idea of the hexagram 6 and where it's going to, the heaven over the stream. So heaven over wind was like blowing through, and now stream goes along with the flow, which I think will go into our animal here that's coming. But it brings up conflict, arguing, but it brings up resolving conflict too, where we stand up for what we feel is right. This makes me bring up Leah's question earlier that she brought up of her standing up for herself and what she needs there. Developing a common ground, right? Because if we need to resolve conflict, we have to find the even ground. We have to find the Libra. We have to find the negotiation, the compromise, the cooperation with the situation. And understanding your own motives within it, which is very Mars in Libra too. Like what part do you play? What are you trying to get out of this situation? How can both people win enough, within the conflict? And also brought up keeping a cool head in arbitration, which is what you just brought up, of being in integrity with your words, and really arguing for what you need. Don't go off on a tangent. Don't go off it makes me think of the Congress and what we were talking about before, where we're just arguing these bipartisan sides of what we need. Well, it's not about getting everything you need. It's about finding enough balance to resolve the conflict that needs our attention now, instead of wavering back and forth.
I love that, because you're totally right. Because it's not about, can you get the 100% victory, right? That's not going to resolve the conflict. No. That's just going to lead to, it's going to lead to future resentment and a future conflict. So how can you get the core of what you are asking for while also giving up something so that the other person feels like they've gotten the core of what they're asking for, and not getting distracted by all these like little I don't know, these, I don't know, what is the word for something like very Virgoan, like, something more than the details, but
Like the superfluousness of
yeah,
like the
exactly.
added, just it's not going to be a perfect solution.
Right. Exactly. Like just not getting distracted by the structure of the deal and the little tiny details, and really getting into the essence of what your agreement is. And like
Mm,
you were setting us up for the animal of the
yes.
day, which was the jellyfish.
Ooh.
Which the notes I have written down for the jellyfish is stop forcing things, go with the flow, back to basics and the beginnings. They also can sting, so your words can sting. But relax, be patient, be calm, float on the ocean currents. You're out in California. Tell us more about the jellyfish out there.
It's so funny because when I think of jellyfish, because I grew up on the Gulf of Mexico in
Yeah.
Florida. And so we had way more jellyfish out there, where there would be a certain time of year where it kind of jellyfish season.
Hmm.
And you just knew they were just kind of out there. Luckily, I never got stung, but many people did.
Those little blue
And
blue ones that look like balloons,
I
the
don't
man of war, what is
I don't
something?
think there were the blue one. I think they were actually a
Oh,
little bit smaller. I know the blue ones that
yeah.
you're talking about.
Yeah.
Jellyfish are beautiful. If you ever see them
Yeah.
like at an aquarium, and how they have a bioluminescence to them.
Hmm.
And so there really are beautiful creatures that you can see through too, right? There's a
Hmm.
transparency to jellyfish. And we talked about that within the fixed star and being
Right.
truthful. And so this is just coming to me now when I'm thinking about jellyfish and transparency,
Right.
where, we have to be, like pretty upfront. We gotta be truthful with this. And there is that non-resistance of being able to go with the currents of life and moving with it rather than fighting it. So I think that is, and I did talk about, we were talking about conflict, and obviously conflict is going to come up, but how long do we have a conflict for? How long do we add to the pain of the situation or the stinging of, when we allow ourselves to acquiesce enough in the compromise in order to go with the flow of things? Because at the end of the day, we need to go with some flow. We might have to fight a little bit, but if you continue to fight, nothing's going to be resolved, and the situation is not going to move forward. So I think that once again, we come up with kind of like a paradoxical nature of like the two together, but we have to get to the point of a non-resistance once we get enough. Once we get
Yeah.
enough, it's so that we can move with the currents of life rather than getting jammed up with it. Which is funny because one of the things that came up is when you're in conflict and there is not a resolution because of stubbornness. Like that
Mm.
was what I read about with the jellyfish. So
Well, and am I correct too that they don't actually have brains? So maybe this could be something about not overthinking, your position as well, right?
and we talked about this before, the
Yeah.
centering, the getting out of anxiety.
Right.
Anxiety is overthinking. If you're giving
Mm.
yourself a headache and you have a migraine, that is your like number one, like, okay, I got to pull back, I got to
Yeah,
do this a little differently.
for sure.
But I love the jellyfish. I thought it was I just kind of like it.
Apropos for this
Yeah,
for
yeah,
this lunation for sure.
yeah. It was kind of sweet, even though we're all kind of scared of them too, right? But if you
Well,
just leave them alone, right?
yeah.
If you just get out of their way,
There you go. Don't poke the beast,
don't
right?
poke the beast. Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, Mel. I think we did it. I think we got through the lunation here. Thank you so much for joining me here today, and thank you everyone that's joined us in the chat. This was wonderful. A lot of great questions, a lot of interesting comments. Thank you, Kelly, for the super sticker. That is
Bravo.
that's a little fox there, I think, or a kitty, one of the two. It's
I think it's a cute little fox.
I love the little images that come up with these super stickers. And make sure that you check out Melissa at energeticprinciples.com. Sign up for her mailing list. Use her code EP20 for my Decans of Libra workshop or the Decans bundle, and you can save 20%. That is coming up in roughly a week or so, a week from Saturday. So
Oh, are you doing it? You're doing it right on that.
Mercury Kazibi.
Yes.
So hopefully the thoughts will be flowing, and it'll be a good thing.
Oh, yeah. I have a feeling.
Um,
I'm feeling you're gonna be on point. That's your third house too. Oh, Spencer's gonna have
yeah.
so much to teach you.
And I've never been accused of not being thorough, so like, I
Giving up
feel
Virgo.
I feel duty bound to give you your money's worth. So we're going to do a lot of things in regards to the mythology of Libra. We're going to talk about some of the planetary influence in the decans, the tarot synchronizations. I really had a good time with the Virgo one last time. So check that out on my store on my website, spencermichaud.com, if you haven't seen that. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to teaching these workshops, and hope that you all join me. And again, you can get 20% off with the code EP20.
Woo.
All right, I think that's what I've got for today. Thank you, Deborah, for the super sticker. Appreciate you stopping
Yay.
by. And yeah, we will see you all the next time. I have, just for those of you that want to know what's coming in the hopper, I've got Kat Rose Nelligan coming up for the full moon on, what is the date that I have here? Oh, she's going to be joining me. Hold on. I've got her for the full moon. Well, I'll figure it out. I'll post it on there. I think that she's coming on the 15th of October. But don't hold me to that. I'll post it in a link somewhere. But she's going to be talking about the full moon in Aries. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I also have a mailing list if you want to know those dates. Sorry, Mercury is playing tricks on me today. But thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate it. And we will see you all the next time, okay? Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
All right.